There's a timeline from 50 BC till 20 AD. Augustus is probably born around 60 BC, but it has to fit on the screen, so we'll start off from 50. Yeah? So we have Augustus, and there's another guy here named Agrippa. Agrippa was Augustus's right hand. Agrippa was there from the beginning when Augustus succeeded his stepfather or his adoptive father, Julius Caesar. Agrippa, yeah, was helpful, very, very helpful to Augustus, because if we're honest, Augustus was a great administrator, but on the battlefield he was not really a courageous man. Whenever there were battles, he was in some battles, but in other battles he would turn ill the day before and he wouldn't show up and stay in his tent. People call it psychosomatic problems. I think it has to do a bit with being chicken, maybe, being a bit afraid. But anyway, and now we turn ourselves to the point of the succession. Now, we start, like I said, from 50 BC till 20 AD. You have to understand that Augustus had poor health, and Augustus didn't expect him to live that long, and the people around him never expected him to live long. But he did live long. He ended up in his 70s, and he ruled for about 40 years. But at the beginning of his life, Augustus didn't know this. So, his main concern, who will succeed me? The succession thing, I've divided up into the women that can produce heirs. Octavia is the sister of Augustus. She has a son named Marcellus. Livia is the wife of Augustus, and from her previous marriage she brings two sons, Tiberius and Drusus. Later in the story, Julia, the daughter of Augustus, is married to Agrippa, and she gets several children. The most important ones are Gaius, Lucius and Postumus. And we also have Antonia, and Antonia is a daughter of Octavia, and the father of Antonia, he doesn't live at that time anymore, but the father of Antonia is Mark Antony. So children from Antonia are related to Augustus and to Mark Antony. That's the timeline, and I'm going to tell you basically what happened. Marcellus becomes Augustus's heir. He gets a lot of responsibility, he gets a lot of titles, but unfortunately when he's in his early 20s he dies in 23. Octavia, of course, devastated. Augustus also devastated, but like I said, life goes on. If you look at the timeline, the two only people left are Tiberius and Drusus, and of course Agrippa. And during this time Tiberius and Drusus get power also. They're not related to Augustus yet by adoption, but of course they are in the family, and they usually get military appointments, and they are, as military commanders, they're quite successful. And Drusus, a nice detail on Drusus is he was campaigning in Germany for quite some time, and he was going for some sort of award called the Spoila Optima. And you get the Spoila Optima if you defeat a king of the opposing side. So what Drusus would do, whenever there was a war going on, he would go with his bodyguard looking all over the battlefield to find kings and kill them, and then of course get the Spoila Optima. So he's a very, 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 very brave man. Julia is eventually married to Agrippa, and she gets several children, but she gets, for example, Gaius, Lucius and Postumus, most important children, yeah, the male children. And then of course we have Antonia, and she is married actually to this Drusus, and she gets children, and they're called Germanicus and Claudius. Now, Marcellus of course is gone. Tiberius and Drusus get into power, or get power in that process. But then of course you get three children by Julia. Now Julia is related to Augustus, so it's more important for Augustus to have his own family to succeed him than those two. Now Tiberius is in the limelight, and then he's not in the limelight, and he's in the limelight. Anyway, in about 6 BC he decides to move to Rhodes and go into a voluntary exile. Augustus doesn't want him to go, but Tiberius makes up his mind and does go to Rhodes. And what happens is that Livia is asking Augustus for the return of Tiberius after a couple of years, and Augustus doesn't want it. But in 1 AD, Augustus bows to Livia, and Tiberius returns from Rhodes, and he is back in Rome, and he's not allowed to have an official appointment. He has to be private citizen. He is a private citizen. But then, disaster. 2 AD, Lucius dies of an accident while on campaign. And 2 years later, Gaius also dies. He is apparently negotiating the surrender of a city. Yeah, he gets stabbed during the negotiations. He doesn't die, but he becomes really depressed, and he writes to Augustus that he wants to step down from power. And yeah, he dies also. A big blow to Augustus, because yeah, family members succeeding him, it's not going to happen, because we have still Posthumus. Agrippa dies in 12. Posthumus is born in 12, but Posthumus has bad behavior. And after a couple of years they decide to have Posthumus banished to an island. And what happens is that Tiberius and Drusus, they get full power. But in 9 AD, unfortunately, Drusus falls off a horse. And because of the complications after that, the wound that's inflicted by this accident, he dies. And then we have Tiberius. Posthumus. In the meantime, Antonia has 2 sons, Germanicus and Claudius. And then in 14 AD, Augustus dies. Yeah, Agrippa is already dead. Augustus dies, and because Augustus has no other option, he appoints Tiberius as his heir. Now, when the will of Augustus is read out, Augustus specifically states that because of the death of Gaius and Lucius, he has to choose Tiberius. So for Tiberius it wasn't really funny to get the throne like that, but he's in his 50s, he waited a long time and he becomes emperor. Now, we still have Posthumus. Posthumus dies also in 14, in the same year as Augustus. There are many versions around his death. Some say Augustus ordered his execution, and some people say that it was Livia and Tiberius. Yeah, Augustus is dead, let's kill Posthumus. We don't know what really happened, but Posthumus is dead, and we have Tiberius. We have Germanicus and Claudius. Germanicus could have become emperor also, but Augustus decides for Tiberius, but he makes Tiberius adopt Germanicus into his family. Tiberius becomes emperor, and what happens after this, yeah, that's Julio Claudian Dynasty Part 2. So I'm going to tell you in the next clip what happens to Tiberius, Germanicus, Claudius, and the whole lot, and it will end up at the end of the Julio Claudian Dynasty. So, in a nutshell, the succession of Augustus, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much.